Hey guys, welcome back to Haunting Hours. I'm Trent, and tonight we're going to read some ghost stories together. So get comfortable, get a cup of coffee, and get ready to take a journey into the night. I like a good ghost story. When I was younger, there were these series of books called Haunted Philippines and True Philippine Ghost Stories that contained ghost stories and paranormal experiences from various people across the country. Some stories were in English while the rest were in Tagalog. They were quick to read and had numerous volumes. Sometimes they even had a section of ghost pictures near the end. You know the kind. Nonchalant landscape or family pics with a blurry figure circled in red. Some of them actually looked convincing and downright creepy. I loved that series, though I should have enjoyed them while they lasted. As of last year, they seem to have been discontinued and are difficult to find in bookstores now. To me, these books were just good entertainment. Growing up in the Philippines provided no shortage of ghost stories and mythical legends. It seemed like everyone had a story to tell or knew someone who had one. I've had a handful of relatives in my family who claim to have had encounters with a ghost, or multo, as we called them in our native tongue. I never thought I'd have my own stories to share, but that quickly changed very recently. My family and I had recently taken a trip back to the Philippines. It was long overdue, as I had not seen my relatives and my home country in several years. It was a bit strange to see all my younger cousins grown up. It was a great experience just to see them all again and spend time with them. On our first week there, we were on our way back to my aunt's house from a long day of shopping when the conversation in the car turned to supernatural occurrences. Our culture is heavy on religion and tradition, and we can be very superstitious at times. There are numerous stories of mythical monsters in Filipino culture, and hearing about them from my parents and relatives only furthered my interest. They included the tikbalang, which was a monster that frequented the forests in the mountains. It is described as a large humanoid creature with the head and limbs of a horse. So, basically BoJack Horseman. The capre was more of a tale for kids. It's described as a tall, troll-like creature that resides in large trees, where it smokes a cigar, waiting to scare off children that are out too late at night. He's usually regarded as non-violent, though. Another one is a tiyanak, and they're the stuff of nightmares. In remote areas near forests, you'd hear the faint crying of a baby. If you followed these sounds deep into the woods, it could lead you to being perpetually lost. Or if you were really unlucky, you'd find the source. You'd stumble upon what looks like a baby on the ground, but in actuality, it's a small ghastly creature that will transform and eat you if you got too close. Then there's the aswang, a shapeshifter that feeds on human flesh at night. A specific species of them, called a mananagal, which translates literally to remover, is a particularly terrifying one. By day, they are in the form of a regular woman, but by night they feed. They root their legs to the ground as their top half detaches itself, sprouts bat-like wings, and takes flight. They mainly target pregnant women, and they have long vine-like tongues that slither down and eat the fetus as they hover right outside the window. I know. Pretty crazy stuff, right? I've always regarded these tales with a healthy amount of salt and a full dose of fear. They were cool and unique, but I could happily live the rest of my life not encountering any of them if they were indeed real. Even when I moved to America, I was still wary of those regional creatures. Anyways, during the car ride, my cousins spoke of strange sightings and experiences they've had, all with varying degrees of believability and silliness. My dad relayed some tales from his younger years about how his group of friends would encounter this and that. He was always ever so dramatic with his storytelling. It was all in good fun, but throughout the whole conversation, my mom remained quiet. She was the hard skeptic type, and would always dismiss those stories as silly folklore. However, at that moment, it looked like she had something to say. My curiosity took over, and I finally asked her if she had any ghostly encounters. She looked at me and nodded. Back during her college years when she was studying to be a nurse, she lived on the campus of a very old school not too far from the city I was born in. Living conditions were pretty rough, and 4 of them had to share a room half the size of a normal American college dorm. On top of that, the campus used to be an infirmary during the World War II. Hundreds of soldiers from both sides passed through and died within the walls of that hospital. Residents of the dorms would speak of strange noises in the night. Footsteps, faint echoes, and knocking were heard in certain parts of the building. There were rumors that the place was also a temporary orphanage at one point in time, and that a handful of children had died there. They said you could hear children's laughter in the walls if you listened closely. On more than one occasion, my mom and her roommates would wake up to faint shuffling noises in the room, like someone small was moving about. When they looked around, they wouldn't see anyone, so they dismissed it and went back to sleep. It wouldn't be until the following morning that they saw what looked like footprints on the walls and ceiling. They were the size of a child's. One of her roommates moved out after that. One night, a close friend of my mom was heading back to her room after a late study session. She was wary of the supernatural, so she kept her head down and walked quickly through the halls. As she passed by one of the empty rooms, something caught her eye. That large room used to be a triage area when the place was still a hospital. The old rusted beds were left there abandoned, and the room was used for storage. She said she saw 6 men lying on the beds. They looked injured and bandaged, and they wore what looked like the uniform of an American soldier from WW2. She stood frozen in place as she felt the coldest chill she'd ever experienced in her life. Then one of the soldiers sat straight up and slowly turned towards her. That was enough to snap her back to her senses, and she took off running towards her room. When she got to her dorm and told her friends what she saw, the brave ones of the group headed to the room to investigate. When they got there, the beds were empty. Ever the skeptic, my mom didn't put much stock in those stories. That is until one early morning when she experienced something that challenged her stance and bothers her to this day. In the mornings before classes, my mom would wake up extra early so she can get first dibs on the showers in the community bathrooms. It wasn't too hard, since a lot of the residents had convinced themselves that the place really was haunted and were unwilling to venture out on their own that early. My mom mostly ignored those stories, and she always got to class early. That morning she did her usual routine, and it went off without a hitch. As she was walking back to her room, she heard it. She said it sounded like whispers. She stopped and turned around. Down the hallway, a figure stood just at the edge of darkness. The lights weren't in the best condition in that wing, so it was dim. Still, my mom could discern that the figure was dressed like a nun. That didn't make any sense, since there were no nuns on campus and the nearest church was several miles away. Staying completely calm, my mom turned and walked away. She quickened her pace, and her own footsteps echoed in the empty hall. She strained to hear any other noises, but heard none. When she turned right to another hallway, she saw the nun from the corner of her eye. It was closer and definitely following her. As she got closer to her dorm, she turned around once more. The nun was at the end of the hall, just as far away from her when she first saw it. The nun stood still, as if she'd been standing there the whole time. My mom quickly reached her door and struggled to unlock it. Daring one more look, she turned to her left, but the nun was gone. Relieved, she turned the lock. As she did, she moved to pick up her stuff and felt an unnaturally cold chill. She slowly looked right, and it was right there. The nun. On the other end of the hall, except now she was much closer and fully in the light. On instinct, my mom turned the knob and threw her door open, and that's when the child ran out. A small, kindergarten-aged child ran out of her dorm room, brushed past her leg, and ran towards the nun. The child was laughing innocently, as if playing a game of tag, My mom watched as the child ran past the nun and disappeared into another room. After a few moments, the nun turned and followed the child. My mom asked around after that experience and learned that the last time there were children or nuns in the campus was back when it was a temporary orphanage several years ago. They shut it down after a tragic fire killed a dozen children and a few nuns looking after them. She never experienced anything else out of the ordinary after that. After she told that story, we all sat stunned in our seats. Mom had been holding out on me. I was thrilled, but also terrified of what I'd just heard. In fact, while I like reading up on urban legends and enjoy hearing ghost stories, I'm also terrified by them. My imagination, fueled by stuff I've read and scary movies I've watched, would always get the best of me when I'm alone in the dark. It was a sort of interesting paradox. Kind of like how at one point in my childhood, I was fascinated by snakes as animals, but I was deathly afraid of encountering one out in the wild. To be honest, I was still a little bit jealous of my mom, that she had such a cool story to tell. I wished at that moment I had my own story. Well, you know what they say about being careful what you wish for? Yeah. Later on in the trip, we visited my uncle, who lived a few towns over. There, he lived with his family where he ran a very lucrative farming business. On the way there, we passed a long bridge that went over a steep ravine with a river below. As our car rode along the bridge, I couldn't help but feel a sense of déjà vu. It made sense, since I'd traveled over this bridge many times before when I visited my uncle and cousins. However, underneath that feeling was a sense of unadulterated fear and dread, like something bad had happened here and it somehow directly affected me. A distant memory, screaming to be remembered. As if on cue, my dad pointed out that this bridge was infamous to the surrounding towns and cities because of the White Lady. Now, like the macabre or the tikbalan, the White Lady is another one of the ubiquitous ghost stories told all around the country. She is perhaps the most well-known, since different countries also have their own version. In America, she's usually called the Lady in White. In Spanish culture, she's La Llorona. The basic idea remains the same. A ghostly-looking woman dressed in a long white dress and long dark hair stands on the side of isolated roads, waiting to hitch a ride. The scenarios vary, but in the Philippines, if you stopped and gave her a ride, she would quietly enter your back seat. If you don't interact with her, she'll leave you alone until she disappears from your car some distance later. If you see her on the road and keep driving, she will suddenly appear in your car and attack you. Morale is, it's better to give her a ride than not. When we arrived at my uncle's large house, I couldn't shake the feeling that the bridge had somehow directly affected me. After a delicious dinner and a round of video games with my cousins, I found my uncle out in the balcony having a drink. He offered me a beer since I was finally old enough, and I took a seat next to him. Hey Tito, do you remember anything about that bridge right outside of town? He put his drink down and regarded me for a few moments. He cut straight to the chase. You were really young when it happened. I suppose you didn't remember it much. Now I was fully intrigued. I had to know. What exactly happened? His warm smile faded and he told his tale. As the story went on, the memories began to flood my mind. Memories that I had long since repressed as a defense mechanism. All the details came to me in excruciating clarity, as if it happened just yesterday. By the time he had finished the story, there was no denying it. I had encountered a ghost all those years ago. It was the mid-90s and I was still living in the Philippines. I was a plucky 6-year-old that was all about adventure and exploring. Once or twice a week, I would spend the night at my uncle's farm. Back then, a small budding business. The town it was in was smaller then, and fairly remote. I loved that place because there were so many areas to explore, but only in the daytime. One particular night, I was over at his place, just watching TV. My uncle got a call of a new delivery of chicken feed that needed to be picked up in the next town. At the time, he only had a few farm hands, and they all had the night off. Usually he wouldn't make a supply run this late at night, but he was behind schedule and needed to pick up the supplies or risk losing profit. As he headed out, he asked me if I wanted to tag along. Ever the restless child, I immediately agreed. My uncle had an old Toyota SUV that he used for all his delivery pickups. I sat in the second row, my usual spot, while my uncle slid into the driver's seat. Most of the voyage was uneventful. It was nearly 11 p.m. at night, so there was hardly any other vehicles on the road. Upon crossing the bridge the first time, nothing happened. During that time, the bridge was newly constructed. It was put up the year before, after the original bridge was ravaged by the last typhoon. The city even put streetlights on the new bridge for better visibility. That was a huge deal since none of the other surrounding roads had streetlights. We arrived at the next town, and I helped my uncle load up the supplies. Well, at least as much as a small 6-year-old can. On the way back home was when it happened. I was sitting in the back seat, absent-mindedly looking out the window, when I felt the car slow down. We were almost at the bridge, and I noticed that something wasn't right. I was too small to see over the seat and out the windshield, but I could tell that all the lights on the bridge were off. At this point, the car slowed to a crawl. "Hey, sport, why don't you lie down and take a little nap?" my uncle said from the front. Something in his voice didn't sound right. It sounded like he was scared and was struggling to hide it. "No, that's okay. I'm not tired. Please, just do it for me, okay?" He sounded stern but measured. My uncle was usually an easygoing guy, so when he got serious, you know you should pay attention. "Okay," I said as I laid down on the seat sideways. I briefly saw my uncle's eyes in the rearview mirror. They showed unmistakable fear. I felt the familiar bump that signaled that we were on the bridge, then the car stopped. "Close your eyes, okay? No matter what, keep them closed." "Okay." I started to get scared. I didn't know what was happening or why I had to close my eyes. Regardless, I shut them tight. Then the strangest thing happened. My uncle started to sing. It was a traditional Filipino folk song, and I'd only heard it once before. About a year ago, my aunt and uncle got into a shouting match, as in a things were thrown across the room type of shouting match. I was at their house at the time, and my cousins and I stayed in their room, cowering and waiting for the storm to pass. An hour later, my uncle entered the room and apologized for the shouting. He then started singing that song to lull us to sleep. The melody was beautiful, and I'd never known my uncle could sing that well. He never did it again. At least, not until that moment, when we were in that dark bridge. The song sounded just as beautiful, but I could tell his voice was shaking. His car wasn't that big, but I was a small child and there was a lot of room in the second row. I was lying down on the seat perpendicular to the windows, trying and hoping for sleep to come. Instead, something else arrived. Click, click. I heard the familiar mechanism of the headlights flashing. All of a sudden, I sensed that I wasn't alone in that second row anymore. My spatial awareness of the car told me that there was someone or something else sitting right next to me. We had gained another passenger. I shut my eyes even tighter as my uncle began to drive. The temperature inside the car became cold. I curled myself into a ball, seeking refuge from whatever it was that was now right next to me. I didn't know much about ghosts and supernatural creatures at that age, and though I couldn't see it, something told me that I was in the presence of something not of this world. My uncle finished the song and started over again. I was amazed that he was able to keep his composure. I refused to open my eyes. I could hear her, so uncomfortably, close next to me. At first, I heard what sounded like clicking. As it increased in volume, it sounded like stalks of celery being twisted and broken. Crack, 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 crack. It was unnerving. Those sounds weren't normal. They were all around me. We finally crossed over the bridge, but she was still there. I was so scared I could barely move. The car hit a bump which caused me to slide to the side, closer to her. I felt damp cloth against my leg. My breaths became shallow, and I started to cry. I don't know what compelled me to do it, but I opened my eyes for a split second. In that split second, I saw her, a brief flash of white with stringy damp hair on her head, blacker than night. She was turned away from me. I blinked the tears from my eyes. When I opened them again, the mass of black hair was now right in front of my face. I shut my eyes tight again. After what seemed like an eternity, the car hit a familiar curve on the road that signaled the entrance into our town. I felt that entity come even closer to me. By this time, my uncle was silent. No more songs. The air became even colder right next to my face, and I shook, not from the cold, but from terror. Then she spoke, right into my ear. It was a hushed whisper, lower than any whisper I've ever heard. I couldn't make out what she said. It didn't sound threatening or angry. It sounded sad. And then she was gone. I immediately felt the difference. I could no longer feel another presence in the car, and the air went from cold to tropical humid again. I heard my uncle breathe a sigh of relief. I didn't open my eyes until we had reached the safety of the farm. My uncle had to carry me back inside and straight into my bed, and only then did I open my eyes. From what I could recall, we never spoke of that night to anyone, not even each other, ever again. Subsequent trips across the bridge at night never resulted in another white lady sighting, at least not for me. I'd find out later that in the early 80s, a woman was found dead at the bottom of that bridge. People said that she was traveling to the next town and was hoping to catch a ride with any passing vehicles. It was late at night, and she had no family nearby that could give her a ride. No one knows what really happened, but many suspected that it was murder. After my trip back to the Philippines, I couldn't stop thinking about that night at the bridge. How could I forget such an incredible and terrifying experience? I guess it doesn't matter since I remember it now. But there was something else I realized about that night, something I hadn't remembered before. When I heard her whisper, I thought I only heard unintelligible garble, but that's not true. She did say something. She said, "Maraming salamat." Translated to English, that means, "Thank you very much." I work as a curator for an art gallery in Japan. In Japan, even in the most modernized city of Tokyo, everyone believes in ghosts. Even the most secular Japanese would be afraid of staying alone in places like the office due to the existence of this ghost that peers at you from the dark spaces in between. These eyes can be anywhere, the narrow space in between bookshelves, a slightly opened drawer, etc. My story started late one evening when I had to stay past closing time to complete an assignment given to me by my repulsive boss. He was a fat, balding, sexist man who has an unrealistic idea of his own importance, and he expects any assignment given to be completed on the day itself. As I said, I was alone in the gallery on that day when I heard a soft tapping sound, which seemed to come from behind a painting. I dismissed it as some internal dripping of water within the wall, and went on completing my assignment. The dripping got louder and louder, and I became increasingly frightened. Still, the assignment had to be completed. To quieten the disquiet in my heart, I decided to play some music in the office. However, after about 30 mines, I heard a strange voice coming from the direction of the painting. It was voiced in a monotonous pitch, and it sounded human with an unhuman quality. Mind you, the entire gallery space was dark with the lights switched off. Only the office had lights on. I wanted to leave at this point, and I couldn't shake off the cold fear I felt at the back of my neck. However, to leave the office, I had to switch on the security system, which was located at the back of the gallery space, near the painting, which incidentally was a portrait piece. The painting featured a woman in a dress from the Victoria period, clutching a fan to her breast. I was at a loss for what to do, so nothing happened at this point to end my dilemma. As I stood looking towards the dark gallery space, almost drowning in stupefying fear, I thought I saw something glisten from the painting. It seemed white in color to me. I decided to pluck up my courage to investigate. I didn't take more than 20 steps to realize what it was. The glistening white came from the rolling eyeballs of the lady in the portrait, who was trying to roll her eyes at me to direct her gaze on me. Her eyeballs were the only parts of her body that could move. The rest of her, including her head, was facing the opposite direction from me. For some reason, I knew that if her gaze falls on me, that would be the end of my existence on Earth. Job or not, this was too much for me, and I turned tailed and ran out of the gallery. Tomorrow morning, bright and early, I went back to the gallery. Although I had ran out without locking the doors, every painting was still in place, even the painting of the portrait. The only difference is that painting is now a blank. The Victorian lady had managed to extricate herself from the painting and fled in the night. My great-grandmother lived with my family at our old house. We had built an addition onto the house so she could have her own kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, etc. After her death, we boxed up her belongings, which included her Bible and various other books and knickknacks, and I ended up moving into that addition since I was the oldest kid still living at home. About a month or so after she died, I was home alone. I had just gotten home from school and decided to watch television in the family room. I settled down, turned on the TV, and proceeded to chow down on a bag of chips. An hour or so goes by, and I hear what sounded like a door slamming down at the addition. My first instinct was to see if my brother was at home without my knowledge, since he had a bad habit of slamming doors. I started down the hall towards his room. I never had the chance to open his door. Further down the hall, in the addition, I saw a person head directly towards my bedroom. It was at this point that I had to fight the incredible urge to shit my pants. I knew there was an axe murderer in the house, and that it was going to be up to me to stop them. I entered my brother's room and grabbed the first weapon I could find, a plastic lightsaber. I slowly crept towards the addition. The closer I got, the colder the air around me felt. It was the strangest feeling ever. I slowly entered my room and saw nothing. I had seen enough movies to know that the axe murderer was in one of two places, either under my bed or in my closet. I checked under the bed first. Nothing. I then flung open the closet, fully expecting an epic axe versus lightsaber battle, but was thankfully disappointed. I began to creep around the addition, looking for signs of a break-in. I found nothing along those lines, but what I did find creeps me the hell out to this day. On my great-grandmother's couch, the couch she sat on every day that I can remember, I found her open Bible, the same Bible that had been boxed up a few weeks earlier. I've only discovered this subreddit lately, but the experience happened at least 7 years ago. A brief prequel, but our house has already been confirmed to be haunted, with all the sightings having the same descriptions despite the large variety in time and relation to the family. All of these reports describe an elderly woman presumed to have been the former owner of the house, dying overseas before it was taken over by her descendant. Paranormal activities have been very normal to me since I was a kid, with nearly everyone in my family being spiritually aware and our love for the unseen world. One night, we had more guests over than our spare bedroom could fit, so I gave up my room and slept in my old bed in my parents' room. It was not your traditional master bedroom setup. My parents' bed was on the northeastern corner facing down northwest, and right before the southeastern cabinets was a large vanity mirror with raised wooden platforms for holding bottles of lotion, cologne, cotton, and jewelry. My bed was on the southwestern corner facing up the northwest, so my head was toward the northern part of the room, with the vanity mirror clearly in sight. I woke up from my sleep somewhere between 3 a.m., and I saw a few dim embers on the topmost platform of the vanity mirror. I was astounded at first, wondering if it was a reflection of any red light source within the room. A few minutes later, I could make out the shape of two creatures, with a specifically shaped ember forming a head, a torso, and its extremities. They soon started moving on the platform as if searching for something. At this point, I was still skeptical about the situation, opting to think that a red light source from the oscillating fan gave birth to these imaginary creatures. But no. A few seconds later, I could clearly see them hold on to the platform's edge and drop down to the lower platform. They moved in a rather comical way, as of arguing about something and consistently hitting each other. The two continued looking around and dropping lower and lower. By the time they reached the bottom platform, their lights had grown considerably dimmer, and after a while, they departed to a corner blocked by my mom's watch case. The next morning, I immediately ran to the vanity mirror to look for evidence, even just a tiny burnt mark, to prove what I saw. Yet, it's as if nothing ever happened. So when I was about 8 years old, I was laying in bed and I saw a little person come walking across my sheets towards me. He was all white, like a ghost, but the size of an action figure, and naturally I freaked and told it to leave me alone, but I don't think it did. Things happen that I cannot explain. When using a remote, the channel will go either one higher or one lower without me touching anything. While I'm using my phone, there are times when I get so frustrated because things won't work, like someone is touching the screen at the same time or move extra pages. Just little annoyances that I notice and try to brush off, but it's getting harder and harder to now. The one thing that I notice is when I'm laying in bed, and if anyone has ever had a pet knows how it feels when they walk on the bed, the motions around your legs tells you something is moving, but yet nothing is there. In the pitch dark, I have felt hands touching my feet. I am really starting to believe that someone has placed a curse on me, or attached a fiend that loves to annoy the hell out of me, with little things that get to me. I'm trying to explain without sounding like a crazy person, but I know I feel something walking on the bed. At times I am laying down. I do have a small dog that sleeps with me every night. She was my mother's until she passed away. And there are times she ups and growls at nothing. Having her walk on bed taught me how it feels when something else is walking on it when I'm laying down, and so this happens almost every night while my Samantha sleeps. Other things happen as well, but it's the small annoyances that are the worst. Finally getting on the right channel only to have it switch again without a touch, or turning off the sound on my phone only to have it turn back on seconds later without a touch. Having my phone in my pocket and suddenly it's calling someone on my contact list, which isn't that weird until it calls someone farther down from the last person I called. As in, I put phone away after talking to person A, and a minute later, I hear hello hello from my pocket, and it's someone on my list that was nowhere near the person I last talked to. So many times my phone called out to people as I am carrying it or have it in a pocket, fingers nowhere near the screen so nothing should be able to press send to call. I could put my phone away after playing Candy Crush, and a minute later, it's calling someone from my pocket, so how does that work? The walking feeling I get when I'm laying in bed is what's making me believe I'm being haunted or cursed. That there is an invisible entity attached to me that does little things to drive me crazy. Has anyone else have something like this happen? And if so, how would you get it to stop? I am seriously getting crazier by the day. My bedroom door slightly ajar until just a moment ago when it just fully closed by itself. The click was loud as the little metal part popped back out into its little hole in the wall. Damn, it must know I'm talking about it. My dream is the more I talk about it, the more sillier it seems and goes away. But I doubt I'm that lucky. By itself, this story sounds crazy, I know. I probably should have started with I'm an empath, destined to be a medicine man. Since I was a child, I have seen shadow people and have been able to guess that things are about to happen, and then they do. I fought hard to fight against it, not having anyone around who can teach me why I see the things I see or know the things I know. It has just scared me growing up, and now it's too late to try and learn, I think. But if anyone has had any experiences like mine and got help, I sure would appreciate any advice. When I was younger, I grew up in this old 1800s house in southern England, and even to this day, I still have occurrences in the house. I was around 4 or 5 when I started to realize just how messed up things were getting. Whenever I went to sleep, I would get these recurring dreams where I would start off in my room, which was at the top of the house, and make my way downstairs. You know that feeling you get as if someone's watching you, and you have that urge to turn around and check. I remember always having that feeling, making my way downstairs, and whenever I did check, I would see these different ghosts. The first, the ghost of this small Victorian child, wearing attire from a century I had never seen outside of this dream, being so young, stood just outside my room in the corner. Down the first flight of stairs, and I would see this woman who stood with her back to me, dressed entirely in an old, black, tattered dress. As I approached her, she slowly turned around, and I saw she had really wide eyes, and her smile would stretch across her entire face. The first two didn't hurt me, just scream at me and run into me. Then the dream would continue. The final ghost was at the bottom of the second flight of stairs by the front door. In my dream, I would sit at the bottom and wait. Wait until a figure appeared behind the glass, and would begin bashing the door until it swung open or was forced off its hinges, depending on the night. This ghost was of a man, incredibly broad and very tall. He was balded, around 50, with rough hands. I don't know why, but he was the most vivid in my dream. He would pull out a knife and slowly push it into my belly. I could feel it cutting into my gut. I would try screaming, but I'd be silent. I tried punching and kicking, but I had no force behind them. And then, as I could feel things get darker, the entire environment in my dream span into a whirlpool, and I drowned to death. That's when I wake up. I would have this recurring nightmare every day for about 5 months straight, hence why they became so easy to remember. As the years went on, my 2 older brothers would talk to me about various experiences when they happened. For one brother, whose room was right next to mine on the top floor, had a friend round, and when going upstairs and looking through the crack in the door to see his friend sitting on his bed, he also saw a ghost of this Victorian girl standing behind him. When going into the room and confronting his friend, neither found any trace of another person in the room. My other brother, after having a shower and peering through the glass pane on the bathroom door, saw his friend standing by the stairs with a figure of a tall, broad man standing next to him. Upon asking, his friend revealed they were alone in the house, as my other brother had left 15 minutes prior. My friend has heard cries and laughter of a woman around the house on the second floor, inside one of the master bedrooms. I have come to realize that the ghosts I saw in my dreams were seen by family and friends about the house. And I've also come to realize that me being so young, I might have thought I was sleeping, but was actually sleepwalking around the house, seeing the spirits that inhabit my home, before blacking out or finding my way back to bed. I have been caught sleepwalking before, and sleep paralysis was regular for me as a child. up until about 10 years old. Creepy stuff. My whole family are very sensitive to witnessing paranormal stuff, and I've had a bunch of other experiences in my house. It happens all the time. I lived in Long Beach, California for about 5 years. I lived in several places, but the first place I moved to with my boyfriend was near Wilson High School, if you know where that is. Anyway, we rented a bungalow that was behind a main house. If you are familiar with Long Beach, there are a lot of rentals like this. This was a 2-bedroom house. The second bedroom we used for an office, and we both felt that room was the most active. Our cat would always go in that room and stare at the wall as if it could see something that we couldn't see. One night I couldn't sleep, so I went out into the living room to watch a little TV. While sitting on the couch out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone walk from our bedroom into the office. When I went to check, there was no one there, and my boyfriend was fast asleep. We had friends that lived across the street from us, and their house had weird things happen, which makes me believe the street we lived on was haunted, but that's another story I will tell another time. Imagine sleeping in a long trailer filled with 50 dudes and 2 sergeants to watch over everybody. Before we even knew about the ghost at the base, they told us about a cadet from last class who studied voodoo. The story went like as many of the cadets were taking showers, they had on cadet sitting on his clothing chest talking to himself. They paid him no mind, just getting ready to go to bed and get ready for the next day. The surgeon said they were outside talking about what pranks they was going to play on the cadets that night. As they talked about, 5 cadets came running outside and said something is wrong. They ran inside to see what's going on. That's when they saw the cadet in a stand-up locker with his back against the wall. He was very dark-skinned, but his eyes were red, and he was speaking a different language. They called the local MPs, military police, to come assist them with this cadet. They told all the cadet to leave the housing. Mind you, it's 50 beds in one long trailer, 25 beds on each side. So as they waited for the police to arrive, they heard screaming and voices. Finally, the MPs arrived. When they walked in, the cadet was bent backwards while facing the door looking at them. Eyes redder than a summer strawberry. They called more people to get back up. Once they arrived, they went in to grab him. Not sure what's going on and who else was in there. They finally went in there and grabbed him. They put him in a van and told him everything would be okay. He insisted that he laid on the floor so they wouldn't get him. While they drove off the base, he started to scream again, saying, "They're coming to get me, they're coming out the woods, I can see them, I can see them." Nobody else say anything. It turns out every night, while everybody was asleep, he'll practice voodoo just like his father and grandmother did, and contacted some spirits and let them into his world. Back to my story. One night, we had to move some bunks down because some cadets were leaving. I told the sergeants that I wanted to be on a top bunk. I was the only one who slept on one wall. I felt like a king. So one night as I slept, I rolled over to look at the other end to see if Sarant was watching us that night. But inside, I saw white figures standing beside everybody's bed. I wasn't sure what was going on. I tried to rub my eyes because everything was blurry, and I knew I had to be dreaming. I believed in ghosts, but I didn't know what to expect. I didn't want to make any movements that would draw attention to myself, so I just rolled over. Next to my bunk bed, which was against the wall, was the surrogate office where they sat and watched everything. It was a small room, but a huge window, just so they watched everything. As I looked, I saw somebody, but I only seen chest down. But I saw they had on a hat. They were in all black, kinda like a trench coat. I rubbed my eyes one more. I wasn't sure if I was dreaming or not. I tapped my bottom bunkmate to wake him up, but I didn't move my eyes from him. I thought if I turned around, the white figures would be up close in my face, because they knew I was awake, or even the man in the black would be closer to my face, so I didn't want to be too loud nor did I want to move my eyes. My bunkmate wouldn't wake up and Trenchcoat was moving closer and closer. I didn't know what to do. My body went numb. My skin started to get hot. I felt the cold energy in the room. I felt something grab my hand. It was cold. I couldn't pull my hand from the grip. I didn't know what to say. Do or believe I let out a scream, but nothing came out. My bunkmate still snoring, so I knew he didn't have the grip on my hand. I rolled over, and it was in my face. The white figure was in my face. I looked at it. It was so bright I couldn't see. I just saw the shape of a young boy and many of these young boys behind him. I heard him speak. My eyes were as wide as a bowling ball. He told me they stood beside my bed to protect us. And he doesn't harm anybody, they protect his from him. I suddenly went to sleep. I couldn't remember nothing from that moment from then on. Every now and then I get a visit from the young boy. I named him Gordon. He's my friend. I would like to start by saying that this experience did not happen to me, but to my grandfather. I was always close to my grandfather. We stayed close up until his death. One thing that I admired most about my grandfather was his tough-as-nails attitude. He always carried himself with such confidence. I had never seen him afraid of anything, and I'd never seen him lose that fearlessness, except for when he would talk about something that happened to him when he was a teenager. I heard him tell the story only a couple of times in my life, but when he would lose that fearless attitude I mentioned before. His voice would become shaky and quiet, and he would get this frightful look in his eye. The experience happened to him in the mid-1940s, when he was around 14 or 15 years old. He grew up in a rural mountain town in Kentucky. One evening, he was taking the dirt road back to his house after visiting his older sister that lived a short distance from their family. It was beginning to get dark, so he hurried along, fearing his parents would begin to worry. To get home, he had to cross an old rickety wooden bridge that sat over a creek. Then, after the bridge, there was a split in the dirt path. Left would take him home, right? Led God knows where. He began crossing the bridge. By this time, it was getting quite dark. Halfway across the bridge, he noticed what seemed to be a woman wearing a white nightgown that a woman back then would wear to bed. She also had long black hair that was well past her waist. My grandfather said this was especially strange since during that time, women didn't leave the house as much like they do now, especially in the rural area he grew up in, and especially not in the evening as the sun was going down. And the fact that she was wearing bedclothes made it all the more strange. She was coming down the trail to the right, so my grandfather turned left and began to walk towards his home. She then turned onto the bridge and got halfway across it and stopped. It was then that the thought crossed my grandfather's mind that something may have been wrong. So living in the small rural area, he did. He figured he probably knew whoever this was. So he began to call out the names of all the women that lived near him. He also called out the names of his mother and sisters. The woman then turned toward him and began coming his way. He then noticed something that disturbed him. He said it looked like she was not taking steps. It's hard to explain, but he described it as her moving towards him, but her legs not taking any steps. They stayed perfectly still as she moved across the ground toward him. He was paralyzed with shock and fear. She then got within about 8 feet from him, and he noticed something that terrified him even more. She got close enough to him that with the short distance between them and the light from the moon, he noticed she did not have any facial features. It was like her face was just a smooth, flesh-colored surface. She had no eyes, no nose, no mouth. She had no facial features whatsoever. He said by then he was terrified, and he turned around and ran home as fast as he could. He said he didn't remember much of the sprint home. He only remembered being home, sitting on the floor of the kitchen, completely inconsolable. He said he remembers crying and shaking and feeling nauseous as his mother stood over him, trying to figure out why he was in the state he was in. After a little time, when he had calmed down, he told the events to his family. His father and his siblings didn't pay him any mind, but his mother believed every word he said, partly because she was superstitious, but also because she was the only one to see how inconsolable he was when he arrived home. Time passed, and he never had seen again whatever the thing was. But he said that he will never forget what he saw, and that it still terrifies him to think about whatever it was on that mountain in the middle of the night. I've been hunting for 5 years. Before that, I was in the Army for 10. And before that, I was a scout, on the biathlon team and into recreational hiking and camping. Suffice it to say, I've spent a lot of years off the beaten track. I'm in the low-risk category to get into trouble in the woods. I'm armed, have bear spray, have with me a radio and/or a mobile phone, depending on proximity to cell towers, and possibly a GPS, and always have a compass and maps. I know the woods and how to survive, and I don't spook easily. I typically hunt solo in massive tracts of crown land in northern Ontario. I've seen or heard wolves, coyotes, and mountain lions. I even saw a wolverine once. Black bears do not concern me. Moose are dangerous, but I keep my distance or shoot them as I'm typically hunting them. Unless I'm badly hurt, I really have nothing to fear from animals in the woods. Humans are the apex predator after all, and it's good to be king. That being said, I am wary, but not afraid of other men I run into in the woods, and most of the time, they're friendly and go on their way. Some are aggressive and/or drunk, but offering them a cigarette and a kind word tends to calm those guys down. I'll share a couple of unexplained occurrences, however, that still chill me to this day. The first one happened a few years ago while I was solo hunting deer in the fall. I was camped for the night in a vast, frozen, swampy area. The only access was a decades-old logging track off the main road, and I was several kilometers from that track. There were no other hiking trails or other access, so I was sure I was quite alone. As a matter of fact, I hadn't seen or heard anyone else for 2 days. I had a good dinner and went to sleep as it started to lightly snow. I woke up with a start at 4:32. I know the exact time because I looked at my watch. I could clearly hear sleigh bells, the kind Santa's reindeer wear. There were no other sounds except the wind and snow, no pre-dawn birds, footfalls, or snapping twigs. Just eerie bells intermittently jingling. At first, I thought I was still dreaming, but I forced myself to check all my gear, to prove to myself that I was awake. Then I sat there, shivering in my tent, praying that whatever was making that sound would go away. Going outside there to look wouldn't have helped. It was pitch black anyway. My mind was running through all the logical possibilities. I'm dreaming. It's a dog or a cat wearing a bell on its collar. It's an escaped reindeer. It's actually Santa. It's hikers wearing bear bells. My mind started to get away from me. I finally couldn't take it any longer and shouted out, "Whoever is ringing those damned bells can go away now." The bells abruptly stopped. I sat there listening for another couple of hours, my mind racing with chills arcing down my spine. Thankfully, they never came back. When dawn broke, I scouted the area with my self-loading rifle, looking for a sign of who or what had passed in the dark. There was a fresh layer of snow on everything, so finding tracks would be easy. Not one track. Nothing. For hundreds of paces in every direction. I had been thorough. On discovering that, I broke camp and got the fuck out of there. Hunting was over for the season in that spot. Sure, I tried to laugh it off. Scared out of the woods by Santa? You're such a little bitch. But I was truly spooked. A few years later, I was out for grouse, beating the bushes for those elusive gray birds. The area I was in was remote, but was cut in two by some high-voltage power lines and towers. I was walking the edge of one of those cuts, enjoying the sunny day and whistling. I really enjoy upland bird hunting. It's a relaxing way to spend the day, and very casual, as far as hunting goes. I wasn't surprised to hear ATV engines after some time, and I walked over to the one that stopped near me. "See any birds?" He practically yelled at me, still deafened by his engine. I offered my hand and he shook it. "Hansen," he introduced, looking me up and down. "That's my surname." I chuckled and told him mine. He was an old dude. I'm middle-aged and getting on there, but he was old. We had a smoke and shot the breeze. His great-grandfather had established the first hunting camp in the area back in 1839, and they still ran it every fall. He knew these woods well. We compared shotguns, talked about the beautiful weather and the usual bullshittery. When I found out they had no younger guys in their party, I was actually hoping for an invite to his camp for deer season, and was angling the conversation that way. Get some tips and stories, new blood carrying on the tradition and all. "How long you been coming here?" He had cut me off, suddenly and sternly. "A couple of years, mostly for birds," I said. "Then you've heard her." "Her? What the fuck was he talking about?" "The witch." I couldn't help but smile at that, although his face was deadpan and serious. Right away, I knew he was trying to spook me off his hunting spot with ghost stories, and just before deer season to boot. Fuck this old codger. What a dick. This is public property after all. "So you're telling me a witch has haunted these woods since the 19th century? I was humoring him. "Yeah, something like that." He spit and put his smoke out with his boot. "Used to live in that abandoned farmhouse off the access road." I had seen the place before, a creepy pioneer log cabin, disused for generations. When my young son had been with me one day, he had refused to go near the place. He'd complained that it made him feel all wrong. "You know she's nearby when you hear sleigh bells." My blood froze. "Well, nice meeting you, Hansen. Thanks for the chat," I stammered, and abruptly turned and walked back to the cut, and I could feel him staring at me the whole way. He eventually started his engine and rode away. What an asshole. How did he know that? Was this some sort of backwoods folklore about witches and sleigh bells? I walked straight to my truck and drove out of there, fast. When I got home, I Googled it for hours, and nothing came up. I eventually wrote it off as coincidence and tried to push it out of my mind. Sometime later, I was packing for my deer hunt. I had buddies coming in from distant cities. It was going to be glorious, and I wouldn't have to go out alone. But then they all canceled, one by one. "Wife's in the hospital," was one story. More like, "She's got your balls." Another one, "Had to work." The always busy and hectic doctor. That story was more believable. Another one was suddenly working nights. No matter, I was going anyway, and would send them pictures of my magnificent deer and regale them with stories for years, whilst reminding them of their lame cancellations. I went back to the power lines area, as I had seen, and followed many game trails during my bird hunting there. Besides, I sure as shit was not going back to the frozen swamp of witch bells, as I now called it. I knew Hansen and his mates would be around, but I knew where their camp was, and I was heading to the southwest near Little Birch Lake, deep in the woods. I had butterflies in my stomach, pretty common for me at the beginning of a season, all giddy with excitement, but they were more intense somehow. I tried not to think of Hansen's story. Then again, if Hansen had obviously survived years of hunting in the same woods, so would I. Fuck it. I went. Furthermore, the weather was nice, intermittent sun, and hovering around freezing. Overall, a nice day to go out in the woods. I wore a smile when I headed out. If you've never been big game hunting in close country, in the bush, as it's known, it's rather slow going. You're wearing light boots and sneaking around, trying to make as little noise as possible. My buddies and I call it last of the Mohican style. Every step is measured and placed carefully, toe to heel, to reduce noise. Your head's up scanning around, ears straining for any hint of game sounds. You stop, just to listen frequently. The English call it still hunting, or stalking. I much prefer it to sitting in a stand, freezing your ass off all day. I proceeded southwest from the cut at my snail's pace. It probably took me all day to cover the 5 or 6 kilometers to the lake. But it was exhilarating, gliding silently through the bush like an expert tracker, taking in all the sights, sounds, and smells. The weather had soured over the course of the afternoon, clouding over and getting breezy. It was getting darker and colder. The late fall forest had come alive, swaying and creaking in the breeze. The change had been so gradual I hadn't noticed it. The witch. It came unbidden into my mind. "Fuck you, Hanson," I muttered out loud. "You're not going to spook me." I realized at that point that I hadn't had a smoke all day. I lit one and sat down, trying to calm my nerves. The smoke was helping. When I was putting it out, I saw something. A hint of black, an unusual color in the woods. Bear? I shouldered my rifle and clicked the safety off, peering through the illuminated reflex sight. "Just me, Bear. Go away now. You don't want to tangle with me." I started talking out loud, in the manner I had learned to scare the elusive beasts away. But I wasn't taking any chances. I had a full magazine of .308 Accubons at my command, should it come to that, and I was an expert shot, having been shooting since I was a kid. I was standing now in a firing stance, and stepping towards the black smear while talking. It didn't move, and as it came into full view, I lowered my rifle. Animal kill. I let out a sigh of relief and walked over to it, chuckling out loud at my nervousness. It was the scene of a bird's demise, a turkey by the looks of it, and fresh. There had been a struggle, and there were feathers everywhere. A fox or a coyote had had a good meal, that was for certain. One of its claws was left. From the drumstick up, it had been gnawed off. I saw the other leg propped up against a tree nearby, and under it was the tail fan. I went to check it out. It looked unnatural. The fan had been cleanly severed from the bird, and the leg had been cut off at the joint with a knife. The evil-looking claw had clearly been propped up against the tree by someone. I tossed the claw from between my fingertips, anxious to be rid of it. My mind began racing again. I was in the middle of nowhere with no trails. "There are no witches," I mumbled as I stood up. I took a deep breath and pressed on, uncertainly. It was nearly dusk now, and the brackish small lake had come into view. The wind was gusting now, carrying with it the scent of putrid, semi-frozen water. I was still feeling rattled, but I resolved to find a spot, set up camp, build a big-ass fire, and drink the flask of brandy I had in my breast pocket, eat some food, and fall asleep. That would make everything better. I was nearing the edge of a clearing by the lake, feeling better about my situation when I heard a loud splash, sounding like something big had jumped into the water, closely followed by another one. Then nothing but the wind as ripples spread across the water. I moved closer to see where they, or it, had gone in. Then I heard them again, sleigh bells. I could feel the tendrils of panic tightening around my chest and temples, like the first time I had been in combat. My vision narrowed. "Fuck you, Hanson. I've had enough of your shit. You're not gonna scare me out of here. Hello? Come out here right fucking now." I shouted into the gloom, yet I could see nothing for the trees. More bells. I'm not ashamed to admit that I fled. I shouted a curse and started back the way I came in. I grabbed at my compass, hanging from a lanyard at my shoulder. My hands were shaking as I tried to make out the luminous dial. The needle spun around at random, totally useless. I held my wrist with my other hand to try and steady it. The bells continued. While breaking into a jog, I fumbled for my GPS and hit the backtrack button. It lit up trail to my truck. I could swear the bells were following me. "I'm warning you, quit following me." I had my rifle up now, aimed back towards the lake. The bells didn't stop. I couldn't see anything by this point. It was pitch black. I realized the futility of threatening with a rifle in the dark, turned around, and continued stomping through the woods, far too quickly, occasionally tripping and cursing. The bells started to subside, then stopped. "Please make it to the truck," I was chanting as I crashed through the tangle of woods. I finally regained enough composure to put a headlamp on so I wouldn't fall down as much. It took me seemingly forever to fight myself through the undergrowth, skinning my shins and knees and hands. I was chanting the whole way. When I finally got to the truck, I was certain nothing had followed me, as I fumbled with the keys. More bells. I don't remember the drive home. Weeks passed. I calmed down. I was thankful that I wasn't harmed or went missing, somewhat selfishly, but also for my family's sake. I had resolved to never go hunting alone again. I was watching TV with my wife one night. She was flipping channels. Would be staying at home, making a big picnic in bed. Click. Missing hunters have been found after the search. Click. "Wait," I yelled at her. "Go back, go back." "What's your problem, Jesus?" Click. A provincial police officer's talking head appeared on the screen. Edward Hansen, 86, of Lanark County, and his brother Robert, 83, also from Lanark, have been found deceased weeks after the search for them had been called off. The coroner has ruled this to be an accidental drowning. No. I was standing now, hands on my head. "What's wrong, babe? Babe?" After being found on the shore of remote Little Birch Lake, no foul play is suspected, and we are not treating this as an active homicide investigation at this time. Anyone with information about their disappearance is urged to come forward. It was about 10 years ago. I was a 21-year-old naive goth girl who always had a fascination with the occult since I was very young. I lived in my first apartment in Connecticut with my now ex-boyfriend. Me and my ex-boyfriend shared a love of great music, alcohol, and visiting beautiful cemeteries at 3 a.m. to be mischievous, adventurous, and naughty at times. One night in particular, we had made our own Ouija board and a glass as the planchette. Needless to say, it was uneventful, so we put it back in the car and drove back home. When we arrived home, it had just turned 4, and our neighborhood was absolutely silent. Pitch black, and everyone had their lights out. We walked in the back door, closed it, and began to walk up the stairs. Before reaching the top of the stairs, we froze in horror of what we heard. It sounded like a hand slamming on the door window and dragging its hand down the glass slowly. It repeated 3 more times. Our hearts jumped to our throats, and we stood in silence in complete fear for what seemed like forever. We whispered back and forth, shaking and completely confused. I screamed, "Go away, you're not allowed in." And for the rest of the night, we heard nothing.